Hello and welcome to the fifth video in my video essay series, the ABC Challenge. Today, for the letter E, we're going to talk about early childhood education. Specifically, we're going to compare and contrast Montessori and Waldorf education. So real quick, who am I and why am I talking about this on YouTube? So my name is Kathleen Austin, or Miss Austin. I am a teacher. I started as a music teacher, and then I've been teaching in Waldorf schools for most of the last decade. So in addition to my personal understanding of these philosophies as a teacher, I want to share the four main books where I got this information, and I definitely recommend all of them as excellent resources. The first one is Heaven on Earth, a handbook for parents of young children. And I've also been reading A Warm and Gentle Welcome, Nurturing Children from Birth to Age 3. Then for Montessori, I've been reading The Montessori Baby and The Montessori Toddler, as well as The Absorbent Mind by Maria Montessori. So just a little bit of background about these philosophies. Interestingly, they were both founded around the same time in Europe. So Maria Montessori founded the first Montessori school in 1907 in Italy, and Rudolf Steiner founded the first Waldorf school in 1919 in Germany. Now, for both of these philosophies, they started in the work of one individual about 100 years ago in Europe. So there's definitely some information to sift through in terms of the core philosophies, especially with Waldorf. I'm actually currently writing a book about some of those difficulties and opportunities in Waldorf education. So please let me know if you're interested to learn more about that, and stay tuned. But it's important to see where these philosophies came from, and also the fact that they've been practiced for over 100 years now, each of these philosophies. So they've developed over time. They look different in different schools in different countries. They even look different within a school from teacher to teacher. So we're going to be definitely talking about generalizations here, but they come from a core approach within each of these philosophies. So let's get into it. Let's start with the most important core concept these philosophies have in common, which is respect for the child. Or in Waldorf education, you'll often hear the word reverence. The child is their own person who enters the world with a lot of wisdom, and their growth is largely self-directed. So a lot of our role as a teacher or parent is to not hinder that growth. And that leads us into the second commonality between these philosophies. There's the understanding that the child is shaped by their environment, and that their development is directly correlated to what kind of environment that they're in. So rather than trying to control the child, we're setting them up for success with their environment. So this includes everything from the toys that they play with, to how much clutter there is, to the way that we are behaving in the environment, how much noise there is the television on. All of these things affect the child's environment. This environment should be very tidy, that there should be an element of orderliness, but also within that container, if you will, the child can have more freedom. And part of that is actually reducing devices that would restrain the child. Now, again, this looks different, not only in different classrooms, but in different homes. You could say you have a Montessori home or a Waldorf home, but there's an emphasis on reducing the use of things like baby bouncers, of course, baby walkers, which are also proved to be unsafe physically. But even, how much time is your child in a car seat or a stroller, or a separate crib, just reducing the restrictions on their movement, and instead making an environment where they can be included. And that leads us right into the third way that these philosophies are similar, which is involving the child in your everyday life and the activities of everyday life. So in both Montessori and Waldorf education, you could say that a core part of the curriculum is doing what we would call chores. But for the young child, it's not a chore. It's a wonderful way they can connect with us, a way they can develop skills and learn about the world. So this includes everything from cooking and cleaning and doing dishes, to gardening and taking care of pets, basically folding laundry, anything that we kind of have on our daily to-do list that we often view as a chore. These are actually some of the greatest gifts to young children. So instead of maybe doing the chores while your child is taking a nap, involving them in the chore with you, even though this can take a lot longer and it can get messier before it gets cleaner, the idea is that this is so important for children's development. And number 4 is time for uninterrupted play and activity. There's an emphasis in both educations on allowing the child to do the work of childhood, that the child is doing these activities and that other than keeping them safe and in guiding them to be kind in their interactions to each other, our job during this time is to not interfere. So we can step back and watch the child and learn from watching them, but we're not interfering in their free exploration and their free movement during this time. And that leads us right into the 5th way that they're similar, which is in the structuring of time, the importance of routines. And in Waldorf education, we might also use the word ritual. So, and also the word rhythm is very important as well. And this gives the child a sense of security and a strong foundation that they know what's coming next. So even free activity has a certain time frame or a certain part of the day when that happens. Ritual or rhythm or routine helps the child in their development to feel safe and secure and to actually be able to flow through the day better. We have all seen, toddlers having a tantrum. This doesn't eliminate that by any means, but it really helps the child to develop an idea of what's coming next. And number 6, another big similarity are multi-age classrooms. So Waldorf education and Montessori early childhood settings, you'll see children of different ages together. Often this is within a 2 to 3 year age range. This idea encourages the children to teach each other. So they learn by example, so they're an example for each other. Number 7, Montessori and Waldorf schools often have a very repetitive and rhythmic idea of circle time and story time. So a story might be told, the same story might be told over multiple days to the children. In Waldorf education, it's often over multiple weeks. And the same songs and games might come back during a circle time where you're physically in a circle singing and doing movements together. In Waldorf education, a story can morph over the weeks, starting with the teacher telling the story and then using puppets and acting it out. And so this idea of repetition of a story is very important. But I don't want to get too much into the ways that they're different. I'll save that for later. Another way that they're similar is that usually both Montessori and Waldorf early childhood settings will offer a second language instruction to the child. So in the United States, this is often Spanish, but it can be any language. And so sometimes maybe the primary teacher will be using this language, or there might be a language teacher who comes in to do songs and games and activities with the children in another language, because language is very emphasized in both these philosophies, again, in different ways. We're already getting into the differences. But first, 2 more ways that they are the same. One is that nature and outside time are very highly emphasized. So if you've ever seen, children in head to toe rain gear, rain boots, rain pant overalls, rain jacket with a hood out on a stormy day. Well, probably not in thunder and lightning, but the rain can really be coming down, and you might hear both a Montessori or Waldorf teacher saying there's no bad weather, only the wrong clothing. The idea is that we prepare children to go out into the environment in a way that protects their bodies, but that they are learning in really important ways in all weather, in all seasons. And the final way that they're very similar is that a Waldorf teacher or a Montessori teacher, when the children are doing their own activities, they're not sitting back and reading a book and putting their feet up. They are actively watching the children to learn about their development, to learn about their social interactions, and to reflect on how they can guide the child's development. So now let's get into the differences. I've just gone through so many similarities, you could just think, wow, well, these sound like they're pretty much the same. But there's actually a very different focus in each of these philosophies, even though they're both very holistic and striving for this natural approach to child development. So a huge difference is in literacy. So Montessori education has much more explicit instruction, especially between ages 3 and 6. They have very specific manipulatives that they'll be working with. They're writing the letters. And Maria Montessori believed that this was the most crucial age at which to teach these skills. Now, Waldorf education, the emphasis is on the way that we are using oral language. Now, I'm also a really big fan of sign language, and of course, for some students, that's their primary language. So that's something I would love to see explored more, is visual language using sign. But the main focus in Waldorf education is on listening and speaking and singing. And so children in a Waldorf classroom will be doing very complicated poems and songs. I once asked a Waldorf student, what's your favorite song? And it went on for about 5 minutes. And again, schools are different. So the school I taught at was a public school, and the children were also doing auditory games in phonemic awareness, like take the word bag and turn the ah sound into I. What do you get? Big, right? So we can work on language games, but symbolic experience of language with letters waits until you're about 7. So that is a huge difference between these philosophies. They both emphasize language, but in completely different ways, especially during ages 3 to 6. The second biggest difference is on the approach to infant education. Maria Montessori observed that there was this huge disparity where at a certain age, the state or the school would take over a child's education, but before that, the parents were just on their own. And so she wanted to help children develop and help parents by having infant schools. So that's an idea that's been around in Montessori education from the beginning. Whereas in Waldorf education, the idea historically was that children should be at home until they're about 3 or 4, and usually that was the earliest that early childhood programs would begin. Now, my understanding is that around the 90s, Waldorf teachers were getting together and realizing that children even younger are needing care. Parents are needing to put them in care. They're needing to work. And so now there are very early childhood and even baby programs in Waldorf education. Others are Waldorf inspired. There's a big range. And these are inspired by kind of a third method as well. So if you've ever heard of the Pickler triangle that children climb on, it's often called the Montessori Pickler triangle. But Pickler was creating her own method. She actually started an orphanage for young children after World War II. Waldorf teachers have started to bring in her methods through a woman named Gerber, not the Gerber baby food, a different Gerber, which is called RIE, Resources for Infant Educators. So kind of a roundabout way to say that Waldorf education didn't used to have infant schools, not that I'm aware of, but that nowadays that does happen, and it's kind of a fusion philosophy. So again, these philosophies are evolving over time. The Pickler philosophy has also made its way over to Montessori education. But it's more common in Montessori resources to see very specific objects or activities or indications for infants. There's also been some change in Montessori education. I know there used to be a resource in the 20th century that really emphasized sleep training and cry it out because Montessori so values the independence of the child. But Montessori teachers and parents are also responsive to research. So now that it's fairly well understood that crying it out is not a beneficial method of sleep training, Montessori parents aren't doing that as much. And so that there have also been changes in how Montessori parents and teachers approach infant care over time. But we'll talk more about sleep later. Another huge difference is that Maria Montessori, developed very specific apparatuses for children. And she observed that children were learning about physics, things that are fundamentally mathematical principles. And so she created apparatuses that take these abstract ideas and allow the children to work with them. Now, in Waldorf, however, there's not this emphasis on abstract ideas at all. The emphasis is on open-ended activities. Rudolf Steiner said that the best doll you could give to your child is basically just a rag with like a string around it, because the simpler the toy, the more the child has to imagine. And that's why you'll often see, if you do see a doll in Waldorf education, maybe it doesn't have like eyes or a full face. It might just kind of be blank, which to us might look weird. But the idea is that it allows the child to imagine any expression on the face of the doll. And then, of course, the rag even further, they're imagining the hair, they're imagining which parts are the arms and the legs. And so the emphasis in Waldorf education is really open-ended play, often with natural materials like just pieces of wood and stones, versus in Montessori, the toys, they can include natural toys as well. Montessori early childhoods will often have clay and things that you can mold with your hands, which is common in Waldorf. Often Waldorf is using beeswax. So there are definitely commonalities, but Montessori apparatuses are very specific and designed to support this abstract mathematical thinking, while Waldorf toys tend to be much more open-ended and designed to, often not designed. I think a lot of the expensive Waldorf toys that we like, that I certainly like, are kind of more for the enjoyment of adults than children. And the idea is actually that the toys are as simple as possible so that the child has to do the work of imagining. Another huge difference between these philosophies is in the types of books and art that you will see. So Maria Montessori specifically said that you should only say to a child what is true and what is real, and really bring the child into the real world. So a Montessori environment might have a lot of photographs and or very realistic pictures of real things and books about real things. Now, of course, this has evolved over time. People love fairy tales, so now a Montessori teacher might bring in some things that aren't quite as factual, but there's still an emphasis on these real life pictures of real things. In Waldorf education, what people don't actually realize often is that the emphasis on fairy tales comes in a little later in early childhood, more around 5 or 6. Again, it's not a hard line. People love fairy tales of all ages. But for very early childhood, the emphasis is on real stories, a story about going to the pumpkin patch, a story about the robin in the backyard, very simple everyday stories. But the art style is more impressionist. So the hope in Waldorf early childhood is that a child can look at a picture and that it can come to life in their imagination. We want the picture to be living and alive. And so often a kind of more impressionist painting, something that isn't as fixed of an image, is more preferable in a Waldorf environment. And also for books in Waldorf education, there's an emphasis on books without words for the child to look at, because the skill of reading and writing is taught later. But again, this varies from setting to setting. But the emphasis is on the fact that the story is oral. So kind of getting into 2 categories here. Oops, sorry. Bumped my microphone. 2 categories. So there's the images that we're looking at, and then the story content. Stories in Waldorf education tend to be memorized stories or stories the teacher is making up. And this is because stories, for thousands of years have been told orally. And this is a very different experience than reading a book, right? There's nothing between you when you're just telling a story. And in Montessori classrooms, there is an emphasis on reading books, right? Because the children are learning to read and write, or they will very soon if they're under 3. And of course, Montessori teachers can tell stories without books as well. These aren't hard rules, but that is a big tendency and a big difference between these two philosophies. Another difference between these philosophies is how they interact with things like media and screens and plastic and bright colors. So both in Waldorf resources and Montessori resources, there's an emphasis on natural materials, on quiet, on not having clutter or loudness. But in Waldorf education, it often goes a step further. For example, Montessori for Babies that I read said really no screens under the age of 2. And of course, every parent is going to have their own approach to that. Versus in Waldorf education, the idea would be no screens at all in early childhood, and ideally even extending that into elementary school. So both of these philosophies have an emphasis on restricting screen time, but in Waldorf education, it's much more restricted. And I would say the same for things that are plastic. Both of these educations value natural materials, but you're more likely to see more plastic things in a Montessori classroom than a Waldorf classroom. And then also with the colors. So a Montessori setting might use a lot of primary colors and kind of brighter colors. And this, again, it's not a rule, but in the Waldorf philosophy, it is emphasized to create a soft environment. And that's why there's often very warm walls and more muted colors. The idea is if the child isn't overwhelmed, because if they're overwhelmed, they'll retreat back. If it's softer, then they'll want to reach out and get involved. And I think, though, that idea does flow through both philosophies because a Montessori room is also very orderly, right? The idea is like the chaos would overwhelm the child and the orderliness allows them to expand out into the environment. But if you look at the classrooms, I'll show you some images here. So this is a Montessori classroom. And again, they're all different. I can't say it enough, but this is typical versus this is a Waldorf classroom. The kind of resulting aesthetic reveals something about the difference in the philosophies. Another huge difference in the philosophies is that Montessori really values independence, and in Waldorf education, there's more of an emphasis on interdependence. Montessori was really focused on how can we help the child to be independent, and in Waldorf education, there's more of an emphasis on the relationship. So again, they're both important in both, but where is your center focus? And this can kind of bring us back to some tendencies with sleep. As I mentioned, sleep training through Cry It Out was for a while associated with Montessori. Now it's more recommended to do a floor bed. So you have a safe space for the child with a bed on the floor, and the child can get in and out of the bed at will. And this will start very young. Versus in Waldorf education, you're more likely to see things like co-sleeping where you're snuggled up with your child. And these are just tendencies. Everyone's individual, but you can see in those tendencies the independence versus the interdependence. Okay, just a couple more. As I mentioned about the apparatuses, Montessori education really emphasizes mathematical abstractions for young children. So things like working with geometrical shapes, a sphere, a prism, a cube, versus in Waldorf education, it's very important for the young child to experience things in their context. So this doesn't mean that you can't have simple toys, but they're more likely to look like a log or to look like a stone rather than like a ball or a cube. So this is an emphasis in Waldorf education on wholeness and contextualizing things in their space, right? So instead of a wooden cube, well, it's a piece of wood from a tree, and a Waldorf toy is more likely to emphasize that. And then mathematical abstractions come later in the curriculum, kind of starting a little bit in first grade and the abstractness increases later in that education. And this approach also relates to the role of the teacher. So as I mentioned, both of these methods really value the teacher's observations. But in Montessori education, the teacher is viewed as a scientist. So the teacher is observing, and the emphasis is to do that as a scientific practice and writing the notes in that way. Versus in Waldorf education, the teacher is viewed as an artist. The teacher is speaking in an artful way, creating an artful environment and experience for the child, and that the teacher can even be artful in their observations with an emphasis on really empathizing with the child. Again, my refrain, I think a good teacher from either method will bring in some of both. So the final thing I want to talk about that they have in common, that they have that's different, is that in Montessori education, you're more likely to hear the teacher giving explanations and instructions. So whether this be for how to use an apparatus or an activity, the teacher might go around and show a group or an individual child. Or if a child says, why does it rain? The teacher is more likely to give an explanation, maybe giving a child cards that show the different stages of the water cycle that the child can arrange and work with in a hands-on way. Versus in a Waldorf classroom, there's more of an emphasis on allowing the child to explore and wonder. If the child says, why does it rain? The teacher might say, I wonder. Kind of look up and think about it. And this could seem like you're withholding information from the child, but the emphasis there is to increase the child's wondering about this phenomenon. And the hope with that is actually to create a foundation for science, because science starts with questions. So that brings us to the end of my very long list. My primary takeaway from this list, even though I'm a Waldorf teacher, is that a child would be very lucky to live in a home or go to a school where a teacher is practicing either approach, as long as the teacher is very loving and kind of using common sense to bring their approach to life. If you're interested to know more things about Waldorf education, I'm definitely planning to share more about that, both in the book I'm writing and in videos in the future. So if you found this video helpful or interesting, I really hope you did. Please like the video. Remember to subscribe to our channel, The Unenlightened Generalists. And you can also save my whole video series for my ABC challenge, where I'm talking about so many topics, both related and unrelated to education. Well, everything's related to education. I'm going to go through a wide range of topics, and I hope you'll come along for the journey. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.